All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm your host, Charlie McGrath. It is the 15th day of January 2013, Tuesday, and of course it's Tuesday, so we have Eric Lovely joining us here, co-hosting with me on hour number one. If you're listening and not in the chat and you want to join in the conversation, go to wideawakenews.com. You can access the chat room there by clicking on the Wide Awake Radio microphone. You can also access Justin TV feed from there as well if you want to watch a picture of Eric Lovely and me doing this live. And I want to thank all the listeners from the Rinse and Oracle Broadcasting Network for joining us tonight. Hour number two, we're going to have Matt Widener, attorney Matt Widener, on, and I'm more than sure he's going to be a little bit fired up about the new, the sweet deal the Two Bigs got in order to get out of any hot water for their involvement in melting down the mortgage markets of this country. And you know what, Eric asked me earlier, a little bit about maybe topics for tonight, even though I think we both knew that we were going to get into the topic of the Second Amendment. But Eric, first of all, Eric, welcome to the program. I'm glad your internet's working fine tonight.
Oh, well, yeah, it's just, I can't, I tried to open up the chat room and your voice started to turn into the Electric Man from nowhere, and the words started to break up. So, yeah, we're running a little lean tonight, so I won't be able to actually view or correspond with people in the chat room this evening.
Okay, well, I'll keep an eye on it, and if any questions come in there for you, I'll try to get them to you. I'm reading a story right now, and I was reading it when Gary Hendershot was trying to call to get me set up for tonight's program, and I wanted to ask you, and if you haven't dug into this at all yet, then maybe we can push it off for another program. But this Aaron Swartz air quote suicide unair quote, have you had a chance to look into this at all?
I have. I've listened to the testimonies of family members today. Yeah. I listened to the testimony of friends. I have read the various different reports, and I attempted. I made a call, and I actually attempted as a news broadcaster, to get more information on the actual status of the suicide scene. What I would call it a crime scene. And where he hung himself and how he hung himself. There are a lot of people with questions on how he actually managed to get the task done. This is an individual, by all means, who is the exact opposite person, kind of person that would kill themselves. They're very outgoing, very headstrong. So far has, unarmed even, as I think that would be not the brightest thing. But even unarmed, he would, get in their face and he would talk down to them. And, he was not someone who seemed to be disturbed or overwhelmed because he was always on the attack. He was never on the defense. He never seemed bewildered by the onslaught of the government. He had lots of support, lots of people pitching in to help him, lots of really brilliant minds. So, I mean, I can't say one way or the other, but looking at the data and basically psychoanalyzing the individual based on testimony that I heard and all throughout the day, I can't see where any person would say that this person would just hang themselves, especially without, there's a lot of other signs too that people are talking about, like there's no note. Now, granted, 96.2% of the time in a suicide situation, it is for grievances and things within their life, and these people leave a note. It is a very rare thing that someone kills herself and doesn't leave a note, because the point of killing themselves is the world has rejected them, or they feel that they can't fit into the world, and they want the world to know. Now, I'm not belittling these people for their problems, but that they want the world to know. They want to
say, "Look what you did to me. Look what you did to me. This is your fault."
Even a guy playing, into the IRS building, and everybody, if you go back, there are manifestos that there's thousands of them of people who have suicided or shot somebody and then suicided themselves, and on and on and on. So to me, it smells like stinky fish.
Well, and even his dad today at the eulogy he blamed the government. He said the government killed his son. Now he's saying that it was this 2 year. And for those of you who don't know, Aaron Swartz was one of the founders or the architects of Read It, and by all accounts, a computer genius. I mean,
Read It was nothing. Most people, everybody knows who he is who deals with instant feeds. Anything
right.
that it's a iPod feed, an iTunes feed, anything that gives you what's called RSS feeds. Okay, he
Right.
wrote the entire platform that everyone in the world uses at the age of 14. That's who he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. He's there's no denying that he was beyond brilliant in his field, and a savant even in the world of the computer. But his goal, I mean, his stated goal, his whole entire life, 26 years old, it hasn't been a lot of life, but is the free exchange of information and ideas on the internet. This was his passion. This was his life. He cared, his fiance will testify to the fact that he cared more about information, exchange of information, than he did by far more about this exchange of free information than he did about money or fame or anything else. And because of this, he ended up going into the MIT databanks and downloading millions of documents so he could put these out for the world for free. And his take on it was pretty simple. The information that our past is being digitized and copyrighted, so that if you want to, if you're a scientist and you want to look at the works of your colleagues, you're only going to be able to do this if you're backed by the corporate interest that has the money. Either they own the copyright to information or has the money to access this information. And, in a speech he gave in 2008, he starts out by saying information is power, and he's 100% right. And, the information is power. And the fact that these monster corporations with their bought and paid for legislators are able to corral this information, lock it away, and make it available only to elite institutions, elite nations even, and it's crippling humanity. And that was his take on life. And so he downloaded these millions of documents, published them, or attempted to publish them, and had a Justice Department that literally, to his father's back to his father's eulogy, killed him because he was facing, get this, he was facing 30 years in prison for downloading information and trying to give it to the world for free. Now, this is the same justice system that has allowed who knows how many trillions of dollars of our future to be robbed and stolen and given to a few elite individuals on Wall Street that haven't managed to put anybody in jail for the crimes committed on Wall Street that are still decimating our economy. Yet they'll go after this guy. These copyright Nazis will go after this guy to prove a point that this information is owned, this information is copyrighted, and you will not step on the feet of the power elite that own this information. So regardless if they walked into his New York apartment, staged the whole thing, kicked the chair out, and watch him dangle, or if they pushed him to the point of suicide, I guess it's semantics at this point. One way or another, he was killed by a overzealous prosecution of somebody exchanging information and ideas. Now, I know we're about to go to break, and we can talk about it more after, but even Julian Assange of WikiLeaks was interviewed about his death. And Eric, he said basically the same thing you did, that he wasn't afraid of prison. He wasn't afraid of the man, if it, as it were. So he finds it very, very bizarre that he would hang himself because he's looking at potential jail time for living out his convictions. We're going to be back with Eric Lovely, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath still, and Eric Lovely is still with me. And we were talking about the Swartz suicide slash mystery. Anyway, Eric, the reason I wanted to bring it up tonight was because you and I have been talking about the free exchange of information ideas for a long time. I mean, that this is the greatest tool this community has, which is the ability to get together. Like I was saying last night, you're in Colorado, I'm in Montana, Gary's in the South somewhere hiding out, and everybody in the chat room. These are folks who are able to come together because of this ability to exchange information and ideas, and I believe that is an absolute threat to the status quo, to the powers that be. And so nothing surprises me when it comes to seeing stories like this, where you find out somebody who is a truther or somebody who is into exposing the corruption, even the corruption that governs the internet, suddenly ends up vanishing or being killed. We saw it. You see it with Julian Assange. He's hiding out in the Ecuadorian embassy. What was the other guy's name in New Zealand? The .com fellow who had all the SWAT and paramilitary police force come in, take everything he got because he was violating some kind of alleged copyright code, only to find out later, that it was nowhere near the scope that the mainstream media had us believing was going on there. So information
is the same thing in this case. See, that's another thing. You keep saying copyright, but right. The information that he took was public domain information. It was not copyrighted at all. No one has copyright to any of the material he put his hands on. They were on pay-to-receive sites. But even the colleges themselves could not sue, because that's generally what would happen. Right. And the colleges themselves were not a party to the criminal activity or a lawsuit because they held no ownership of the actual public works information that was available.
So it's a matter of going after the site. He was going to sites that were pay-per-view sites.
Correct.
Pay-per-views, and hacking into those sites.
Correct. So, I mean, I don't know what you could get him for, some type of maybe weird minor version of espionage, but how they turned it in. Everybody talks about intellectual property rights, and this is one of those things that people really should look at this case, because when you look at the mainstream media, that's all they said. Intellectual rights, copyright, intellectual rights, copyrights, and they kept bouncing this back and forth, and neither one of those terms apply here. None of the college professors, every single one of the college professors, when they publish those papers, they they sign off making them public works documents. In other words, they are actually in the public scope. Anyone can take them. Anyone can use them. You just can't publish them for profit, okay, which he wasn't doing. So this whole thing is about, if you look at the different people that have been assassinated or their doors kicked in and the things that have been taken away from them, Julian Assange, this is about returning to a Fabian fiefdom. It is about gatekeepers of information. And back when they had their fiefdom intact until it was disrupted by the little revolutionary thing over there on that American continent, and when that happened, there were only two doorways to get to information. And they were called two different people. They were priests, okay, or acolytes of that school, and they were the gatekeepers of knowledge. The other version was directors, or the directors of propaganda, the guys who put on the plays, who put on the musicals, that traveled around from town to town waving their Hollywood stick in their hand. And these are the two versions of gatekeepers. Well, what they're attempting to do is they're attempting to hold the bottle together as long as they can while they erect gatekeepers over internet access and gatekeepers over information on the internet. That's what I see happening here. And I will tell people that they're fully capable and plenty happy to kill anyone they have to, or destroy anyone's life that they have to become the gatekeepers once again. They had it up until the internet really exploded and people like you and I appeared. They could do so much, and then they would get knocked down because there was encryption and peer-to-peer services. And if you see over the years, they've attacked these different things we've used as freedom tools. This gentleman went on a whole nother pattern, and basically he was quite brilliant. The feed would come into his house, and instead of actually accessing the feed and taking it, okay, he would simply split the feed inside his PC and loop it back into himself and copy it and then send the same feed back out. So he wasn't actually taking anything from the feed, so the security features couldn't stop him. He was just copying the feed itself. So this is really what's happening, and you're seeing that. And you know, when we talked about Gary Franchi and what's going on with them testing it out, this is something that needs to be done. As you know about me, I've said it for a long time. We need to unify. We need to become the world's next giant media. We need to become the new mainstream media. Alternative media people need to band together one at a time and keep building until you receive critical mass and you have a, Next News Network that really has under it 20, 30, 40, 50 alternative media people all donating to one source, all working together, because you have to become so big, so monolithic at this point in our message and in our cause that they cannot attack any individual piece. They have to take the alternative media on as a whole. The same as, they can take Charlie to court, but when Charlie's out of money, Charlie's done, okay? He's got nothing else left. But if they go in and they take on 60 hosts that have created a financial throughput into that conglomeration, then you have a lot more money and you can fight as a juggernaut, all banded together in court instead of everybody flopping around like independent fish.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Eric. I mean, there certainly is a need to unify. We're going to be back with Eric Lovely, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes, guys. Hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, your host, along with Eric Lovely, Gary Hindershot hiding behind the scenes there. Eric was talking about the need to come together in alternative media. I agree, and I also like I like the fact that there's so many people in so many levels participating in alternative media. I agree that as far as watching each other's back, as far as coming together in one voice, it's very, very important. Mainly because you're right, Eric. Who knows when the day will come when somebody's knocking on the door, or suddenly I'm slapped with some kind of lawsuit to cease and desist, or Jeff or any of these other folks that are in alternative media, or just like you said, sued into oblivion. And even worse case scenario, even worse scenarios could play out. So when somebody disappears, when somebody suddenly commits suicide, there needs to be a voice out there that that individual just doesn't vanish into an afterthought, because it's so very easy to do. With the domination of mainstream media, it's easy to convince a populace that this person never even existed. In a lot of cases, I mean, we see. I last night I talked about the ABC Washington Post poll. Now, as long as I have been alive, and I'm convinced to this very day, the majority of Americans absolutely, positively believe in the Second Amendment, believe that it is our right to bear arms, and I do believe most people understand the root of the Second Amendment isn't clay pigeon shooting. It isn't white-tailed deer hunting. It is to protect against a tyrannical government. Period. That is in fact the true origin of that Second Amendment. But it is so easy to convince, use a mainstream media to convince a populace that they have the wrong point of view. I mentioned that CBS Washington Post poll last night, that out of nowhere, suddenly 52% of the country wants gun control legislation. They want stricter gun control legislation. And the numbers go higher, up to 60% when you talk about parents or people in this country that have children, obviously playing on the tragedy that happened in Connecticut. But the notion that the mainstream has a stranglehold on information isn't actually accurate, right? Because they attempt nonstop 24/7 to violate the minds of every person in this country with their propaganda. But the truth is, for a long time now, because of the internet, more and more people are starting to not trust the mainstream media. It's amazing now to watch something unfold and be presented by the mainstream, and then to immediately see even people that we consider to be asleep challenge the official report. Sandy Hook was one of them. A lot of people that are even mainstream are questioning, why do they have multiple shooters reported? Why do they have somebody pinned down in the forest behind the school? Why is there so many contradictory stories going on about the shooter? Why is his dad involved hip deep in the financial service industry? Why is it another case, just like we saw in Aurora, psychotropic drugs? These are people a lot of people we consider to be asleep that are asking these questions. So the stranglehold of the mainstream, Eric, I think is waning, and the reason is because they keep trying to push out a version of reality that is harder and harder to swallow when we can look around and see with our very own eyes that things are not the way they say they are.
Well, it's definitely becoming more and more ridiculous and outlandish, the stories that they come with. However, I'm going to plug another program, the SGT Report. I'm sure people know who it is and know who that is on the internet, and I don't have any contact with that individual. However, I will say this: if you listen to that program, what the internet has now produced is they actually has a 6 different 20-minute programs with police officers. Okay, now these guys are a group of SWAT members. They are around the state of Connecticut, all across the state of Connecticut, that have come together. They are listening to the SGT report, so they're actually listening to us and not to their bosses and not to the mainstream media. And they've looked this case over, and they've actually come out and said, as investigating officers and members of SWAT team, we can tell you this doesn't make sense. The shooting couldn't have happened this way. So now you have actual paid professionals that are starting to step across the line and say, this sounds hokey. And they're starting to do interviews and talk about it in public. And see, that is really where the gem of the internet is really being shown, is that, yeah, the harder that we work, there are more people who are listening. There are more people who are saying, you know what, this doesn't make sense. Screw it. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to call someone up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to take part in alternative media. And this is, if we start to, like I said before, build and come together, even if there are 3, 4, or 5 different major stations that develop out of it, it doesn't really matter, because as we grow, we already have now the inkling of credibility because of the way some of us conduct ourselves, providing information, doing sound stories like Charlie, like I, like the guys over there at the Next News Network, when they cover this information. Professionals are now looking at us going, wait, they're more professional than the mainstream media. They don't care about putting the best looking face in front of you. They
wait a minute.
Teleprompters.
Hey, wait a minute.
Well, you have to understand, I'm below average and you're just average. So, and you look at these people that they put on TV, and their hair is perfect and their makeup, and they don't have
paid plastic spokesmen is what I've dubbed them.
Exactly, and they have earpieces in where the news is pumped directly into their ear, and they simply regurgitate what is told to them, and so on and so forth. These are things that people don't understand. So you now have professionals who are seeing us do the exact opposite. They're seeing us be real journalists, be tenacious journalists, and they're coming to us.
And questioning the status quo. And this is something that has been lost. This is something that's been lost in media. I mean, if it doesn't come from AP, UPI, Reuters, then it doesn't exist. So you have everybody on every paid plastic spokesman network regurgitating the exact same line, and it's all created, in some clearinghouse somewhere. So the news is, there is no news. I mean, there's only the status quo. There's only the line that's written and then disseminated for all these people to report. And what's comical to me is to truly believe that there's a side of the media that supports your point of view. We are told nonstop that Fox News is all about red state Republicans, and CNBC or any of these other networks are all about blue state liberals. You know what? They report the exact same thing. They're not reporting anything that's contradictory to the other networks. They're just putting their little spin on it so that the consumer of the propaganda feels like that their interests are being served, or that their position is being represented. You don't see anybody coming out talking about comparing the amount of Sandy hooks that are happening in Afghanistan or Pakistan every year at the expense of Hellfire missiles and drones. You don't see that. They all report the same thing. This tragedy that occurred, and then rolling out the agenda of gun control. So to assume that we have anything that is even reminiscent of what media used to be, what reporters used to be, is an absolute joke. It's like it's the same thing pretending we have two different parties in Washington D.C. One that is a liberal and one that is a conservative, and they're going to represent the people. No, they're not. They don't represent the people. They do when the cameras are on. They pay lip service. Well, guess what? The same mega corporations that control Washington and control the politicians, well, they just so happen to control the media. That's why from 1980, when we had 50, 60 corporations controlling the majority of the news, it's whittled down to just a handful controlling the majority of the news. It isn't about exchanging information and ideas like was this young kid's dream. It's about controlling information and ideas so you can have a mass herd that you can put into one pen, put into another pen, and they can fight amongst themselves while the tyranny continues. We're going to be back with Eric Lovely, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. All right, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Eric Lovely and myself we've been in this conversation about exchanging information, ideas, the media, what it's become, and hopefully through alternative media, and again, the centralization of it. I like it, but I also like the independence of guys going on YouTube and just giving their commentary on what they see, or people who are writing articles about what they see. I love it, and I truly believe we need now. I mean, this is the time where we need 100 million journalists, 100 million people with cameras, 100 million people who are not afraid to report what they see and give their opinion on what they see, rather than turn on a television, turn on a computer, and be told what happened and be told what they should think about it. This is, in my belief, the largest single danger to the current power structure, period. It isn't the fact that there's hundreds of millions of guns in this country. It isn't the fact that militia movements and things like that springing back up. It is people willing to turn off their television, turn off their computer, and really disseminate information on their own. Listen to us, if they read a story or listen to a story, ask the question, does this make sense? Should I believe this? Should I believe that we're continually waging war to spread, air quote, democracies around the world? This is the danger to the establishment. This is why, Eric, I believe we've seen this non-stop reminder, this constant drip in the background of potential terrorist acts happening to the internet. A shutdown of the internet kill switch, SOPA, PIPA. We are constantly bombarded with the threat that our internet is going to come under attack. Therefore, we must have the power in one location to go ahead and control it. But it isn't about protecting us. It's just like TSA. It's just like the Patriot Act. It's just like National Defense Authorization Act. They tell us it's for protecting us, but in reality, it's just another control mechanism.
Well, yeah, I mean, this really is a shakedown and the breakdown of it. It is about control. And when I've already got a message or two about the whole unification idea. You see, here's the hard problem that people just don't understand is that news media should take the founding fathers' idea, the alternative media section, whether you're doing video feeds or whether you're doing documentaries or movies or you're doing your own independent news broadcasts. When you overlap and you interact and you continue to do or you unify on the broadcast of information, you don't unify behind a single banner. You can maintain independence but work together. And your audiences, if something happened to you, let's say Charlie, then my audience and the people who know you would respond for you. And Gary Franchise and all of these independent people, so that instead of one person and one person's audience, you now have 20, 50 hosts and 50 hosts audience all saying what you did to that person is wrong. We're going to tear you down. We're going to break you up, and we're just going to rip the whole system apart until you correct it, release them from jail, whatever it is. And see, this is actually the American idea. And back once upon a time, when you had a actual class, okay, that taught you, okay, on civics and actually taught you about what the Constitution and things meant, there has long since been the sole idea of the Constitution, as quoted by a gentleman who created the von Mises Institute. And what he said was a phrase when looking at American law, and this is the way the new American media should be said: uniformity without conformity. And that's what it means. We are going to unify. We are going to stand behind the idea of a free press. We are going to stand behind the idea and uniformly stand behind the idea of truth and disseminating that information to our listeners. However, I never have to conform to any rule set displayed by any other host, except for basic social agreements. Look, don't lie, don't cheat. We're all unified behind the truth. And then you have uniformity of purpose without conformity of individuals. And you can have independent ideas and independent ways to work at the situation and different independent people collaborating. But that's the idea of the American government. There was an enumeration of independent free people and rights. And we're going to base a government on that requires no conformity. We will give you uniformity without conformity. In other words, you won't have to you won't have to amalgamate yourself and conform to anyone else's rules. And that's the basic idea, underpinnings of the American Constitution. And people really should understand it, and that's where we should go. And I will be so bold, and it's not my opinion, because I've got messages on it too, because people want me to cut to the chase, or they have difficulty explaining it to their family members. Look, hunting, target practice, all these things that you do with your rifles and whatnot, those are a way of life and a hobby. The Second Amendment is for your weapons platform to be utilized in a show of force or violence or actual violence to maintain your government's complete fear of you. In other words, Joe Sixpack, your gun and your right to a gun, the intention of it is for you to kill people that attempt to take away your freedom. That's what the Second Amendment means. I don't care what anybody says about supporting violence. Really, these people, you have no idea. Okay, you're talking about the Second Amendment, and you're talking about gun rights, and then in the same breath you say, but I don't support violence. That is the entire intention of the Second Amendment. It is about the violence that I can do to you and that I will do to you if you become tyrannical. That's all it's about. It's all about violence, and people just don't understand that. Like, when the government fears the people, liberty will flourish. When the people fear the government, okay, it was blah, 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 blah. Well, how do you generate fear? Okay, they didn't use any other word. They used the word fear. Well, if someone fears you, it is because they are afraid of the violence and damage you can do to their person, their property, their lives, everything. So people need to give up this whole idea of this anti-violence clause, because you have no freedom of speech. You have no anything without the show of violence or the possibility of invoking that violence on those who attempt to take it away from you. If you cannot instill within them the fear of violence upon their person, they aren't going to listen. Why? Because they bought off every judge. They know how to own the judges. They know how to own the political system. They know how to own your vote. They know how to own everything. So what possible avenue do you have? People really need to understand and become really amalgamated with what the forefathers actually taught us. Because, and it boils down to great things that were said, like Thomas Jefferson. The only right any man has are the ones he's willing to die for, and those are the facts. And this is something that's really difficult for me, because I'm not advocating that you go and start chopping up and butchering neighborhoods and so forth. I'm trying to get you to understand that the root of the Second Amendment is violence. Okay, violence against another human, not a deer, not an elk, not a cow, not a bobcat, not a mountain lion, not rabbits that scurry around in the bush because you want to feed yourself. It is about free people enacting violence, pain, and death upon those who will choose them to not be free, okay, or attempt to force them to not be free. That's the root. And until people start growing up and being mature about it and understanding what it means,
Well, understand this, that the threat of violence, the threat of violence is what's used by government in order to enforce, in order to put their laws onto you. It isn't this notion as our media wants us to believe that we're different people now. We're people. We've evolved into this more kinder, gentler society. That isn't. I mean, the force of violence is why you pull over when those lights come on behind you. The force of violence is why you pay your taxes. The force of violence is used every single day in order to have you capitulate to the laws that are passed, in most cases on behalf of special interests. So, the idea that violence is a thing of the past, we deal with. I mean, there's more violence happening in this world right now than probably at any time in history. Every corner of this world is encompassed in some sort of violence.
And here's the big thing that people, they really don't sit down and think about it, because you're 100% completely correct. Here you go, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody says it all the time. Don't pay your taxes. Okay, if you don't believe that this system is based on violence, don't pay your taxes. And when they come to evict you, lock all the doors, board up the windows, and tell them no. Then they're going to bring in more people with guns. They're going to bust down your door. And if you attempt to resist at that point, they will kill you. That is the ultimate end game for them. You will comply or you will die. That's how it works. They may opt for a taser and electrocute you half to death and then stick you in a cell under a building until you comply. But this is the reality. The government is all about violence, and they're more than happy to be violent to you. And there are people already in the government right now that have been police officers for years that are more than happy to communicate violence upon you and your person so that they can continue to collect their paycheck. So this whole conversation to me where people start talking about good police officers and the system isn't all bad, they have no touch with reality. Just say no and continue to say no. And eventually, if you're successful enough with your no, there's going to be a barrel stuck in your eyeball, and it's going to have bullets behind it, and they're going to say, go ahead and say no one more time. And if you don't have the ability to stick your barrel in their nose and say, I dare you, because I'm going to pull the trigger first, guess who wins? It isn't you, and it isn't freedom, and it isn't any of your ideas. And those are the bottom line. And people really need to come to grips with that. All the tree huggers and the pacifists and everything, hey, God bless you if you don't want to fight, I guess, but, get out of the way, because you really, truly are useless other than cannon fodder. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Charlie. We've really went to a real dark place real quick there, buddy.
Well, but this is what's coming.
But here's it is what's coming. First of all, we're about to run out of time, but it is what's coming. In fact, tomorrow we're going to hear the 19 things that this administration can do vis-a-vis executive order to implement gun control. Of course, we got to protect the children. We're not doing a good enough job protecting our kids, even though you're more likely to be struck and killed by lightning than you are to be involved in a mass shooting. So it is very topical. And Eric, you're right. I mean, violence is alive and well in the United States. Guys, I spoke earlier. Matt Widener is coming on tomorrow night. Second hour, so I apologize for misspeaking there. Coming up here in just a few minutes, we have Bob Fletcher back on the program to finish up what we were talking about when he was on last week. All right, guys, stay tuned. We're going to take our long break here. We'll be back in just a few minutes with Bob Fletcher, more Wide Awake News Radio.